The dusty wooden floors creaked beneath her knees as Penelope Daniels knelt in the center of the empty schoolhouse. Her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, whispering prayers into the silence of the late afternoon in 1878. The sun filtered through the cracked windows of the building in Jamestown, California, casting long shadows across the desks where children had sat just hours before, their laughter and chatter now replaced by the sound of her desperate pleas to the heavens above. She had come to this town 3 months ago with such hope, fresh from San Francisco with her teaching certificate and dreams of making a difference in the lives of frontier children. But those dreams had crumbled like the dried earth outside when the school board informed her that morning that they were cutting her position. The mine that funded most of the town's operations was struggling, and luxuries like education were the first to be sacrificed. They gave her until the end of the week to pack her belongings and leave the small cabin behind the schoolhouse that had become her home. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking in the emptiness. "I have nowhere to go, no family to return to. Show me a sign, show me what I should do." Her parents had died 2 years prior in a hotel fire, and she had no siblings, no relatives who cared enough to take in a 22-year-old woman with nothing but education and determination. The little money she had saved was barely enough for a stagecoach ticket, and even if it were, where would she go? Back to San Francisco, where she would be just another desperate soul looking for work. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats broke through her prayers. Penelope lifted her head, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. It was probably just someone passing through town, heading to the saloon or the general store. She returned to her prayers, but the hoofbeats stopped right outside the schoolhouse. Heavy footsteps climbed the wooden steps, and the door creaked open behind her. Penelope scrambled to her feet, smoothing down her simple blue cotton dress, trying to compose herself quickly. She turned to see a tall man silhouetted in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He removed his worn brown hat, revealing dark hair that needed a trim and a face weathered by sun and hardship. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice deep and hesitant. "I did not mean to intrude. I saw the door was open and thought maybe someone needed help." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest as she took in the stranger. He was perhaps in his late 20s, with kind brown eyes that seemed at odds with the rough exterior of a man who clearly lived a hard life. His clothes were dusty from travel, and a gun belt hung low on his hips, but something in his expression was gentle. "I am fine, thank you," she managed to say, though her voice wavered. "I was just finishing up some work here." The cowboy stepped inside, looking around the schoolhouse with what appeared to be genuine interest. "This is the school, then. I passed through Jamestown a few years back, but there was not much here then. Good to see the town growing." "It may not be growing much longer," Penelope said before she could stop herself. "At least not in ways that matter." The man looked at her curiously, and she could see him noticing her red-rimmed eyes and the traces of tears on her cheeks. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, as if unsure whether to stay or go. "I am sorry," Penelope said quickly. "That was inappropriate. I should not burden a stranger with my troubles." "Sometimes strangers are the easiest people to talk to," he replied. "My name is Zachary Foster. I have been working cattle drives up north, but I am looking to settle somewhere. Thought maybe Jamestown might be the place." "Penelope Daniels," she introduced herself, managing a weak smile. "I am the school teacher here, or rather I was. The school board just informed me this morning that they are letting me go." Zachary's expression darkened with sympathy. "That is a hard blow. Do you have family here?" "I have no family anywhere," Penelope admitted, then wondered why she was being so honest with this complete stranger. Perhaps it was because she had no one else to talk to, no one who would understand or care. The other women in town were kind enough, but they had their own families and troubles. I came here alone, and it seems I will leave alone. Where will you go? The simple question brought tears back to her eyes. I do not know. Zachary was quiet for a moment, turning his hat over in his hands. I am sorry, Miss Daniels. That is a difficult position to be in. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Zachary cleared his throat. I should let you be. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right. If you need anything before you go, I will be staying at the boarding house for a few days while I look around town. He turned to leave, but Penelope found herself speaking up. Mr. Foster, why did you stop? When you saw the door open, why did you come in? Zachary paused in the doorway, looking back at her with those kind eyes. I heard someone praying. It reminded me of my mother. She used to pray like that when times were hard, when my father was sick. I thought maybe whoever was praying needed the kind of help that comes from another person, not just from above. Something in Penelope's chest tightened at his words. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. She passed 5 years ago, right after my father. That is when I took to the cattle drives, trying to outrun the loneliness, I suppose. He gave her a sad smile. But you cannot outrun it forever. Eventually, you have to find a place to stand still. After Zachary left, Penelope sat at her desk and stared at the empty classroom. His words echoed in her mind. Eventually, you have to find a place to stand still. But how could she when the ground kept shifting beneath her feet? That evening, she lay in her small bed in the cabin behind the schoolhouse, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the cowboy with the kind eyes. Something about their encounter felt significant, though she could not put her finger on why. She had prayed for a sign for help, and then he had appeared. But what did it mean? The next morning, Penelope woke determined to not spend her remaining days wallowing. She would teach her students as she always had, and make these last few days count. She dressed carefully in her green calico dress, pinned her light brown hair up neatly, and walked to the schoolhouse with her head held high. The children arrived in their usual chaos of laughter and shouting, their faces lighting up when they saw her. She had not told them yet that she was leaving. That would come later in the week. For now, she wanted to give them the gift of normalcy. She was in the middle of a spelling lesson when the door opened and Zachary Foster walked in. The children all turned to look at the stranger, and Penelope felt her cheeks flush. Mr. Foster, she said, trying to keep her voice professional. Can I help you? I apologize for the interruption, Miss Daniels, he said, holding his hat in his hands again. I was hoping I might have a word with you when you have a moment. The children giggled and whispered among themselves, sensing something interesting was happening. Penelope felt flustered but maintained her composure. Children, please continue practicing your spelling words. I will be right outside. She followed Zachary out onto the small porch of the schoolhouse, acutely aware of the small faces peering through the windows behind them. What is this about, Mr. Foster? She asked, genuinely confused. Zachary seemed nervous, which somehow made him more endearing. I did a lot of thinking last night, Miss Daniels, about what you said about having nowhere to go, and about what I said about needing to find a place to stand still. Yes? Well, I have some money saved up from the cattle drives, not a fortune, but enough. And I have been thinking that maybe I could start a ranch here, raise horses maybe. But a ranch needs more than just one person to make it work. It needs help, it needs purpose. Penelope's heart began to beat faster, though she was not sure why. Zachary continued. What if the school board is not willing to pay you, but what if someone else was? What if you could teach not just the children in town, but children from the surrounding homesteads too? Kids whose parents cannot bring them into town regularly. We could set up a small school right on the ranch property." "Mr. Foster, I do not understand. Are you offering me a job?" "More than that," he said, his brown eyes intense and sincere. "I am offering you a partnership of sorts. You keep teaching, I build the ranch, and we both have a place to belong. I know it is unusual, and I know we just met, but sometimes you have to take a chance on something that feels right." Penelope stared at him, her mind racing. This was highly unconventional. She barely knew this man, and he was essentially asking her to move onto his property. What would people think? What would the school board say? But then again, what did she have to lose? She was about to be homeless and jobless anyway. At least this way, she could continue teaching and she would not be completely alone. "I would need my own living quarters," she said slowly. "Separate from yours, proper and respectable." "Of course," Zachary agreed immediately. "I would build you your own small house on the property." "Everything would be proper, Miss Daniels. I am not trying to take advantage. I genuinely think we could help each other." "Why me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." Zachary was quiet for a moment, seeming to search for the right words. "When I walked into that schoolhouse yesterday and saw you praying, I saw someone who had not given up yet. Someone who still had faith even when things looked dark. That kind of person is rare, Miss Daniels. And when I heard about your situation, I realized that maybe your prayer was answered and so was mine. I have been alone for so long, wandering from place to place with no real home. Maybe we were both praying for the same thing without knowing it." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes, but this time they were not tears of despair. "I need to think about this, Mr. Foster. This is a big decision." "Take all the time you need," he said. "I will be in town for the next few days regardless." He left, and Penelope returned to her classroom in a daze. The children bombarded her with questions about the handsome cowboy, but she deflected them gently and tried to focus on the lessons. But her mind kept wandering back to Zachary's proposal. That evening, she sought out Martha Henderson, one of the few women in town she had become friendly with. Martha was in her 40s, with 5 children of her own, and ran the boarding house where Zachary was staying. "Martha, may I ask you something in confidence?" Penelope asked as they sat in Martha's kitchen, cups of coffee between them. "Of course, dear. What is troubling you?" Penelope explained the situation, and Martha listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "It is unconventional," Martha admitted when Penelope finished. "But these are unconventional times, especially for a woman alone. I have been worried about what would become of you when the school closed. You think I should consider it?" "I think you should learn more about this Mr. Foster before you decide," Martha said wisely. "He seems like a decent man from what I have seen. He is staying at my boarding house and he has been nothing but polite and respectful. He does not drink to excess, does not cause trouble, but you should talk to him more, get to know his character." That night, Penelope prayed again, but this time with a different question. Was this the answer to her prayers, or was she being foolish? Over the next 2 days, Zachary came to visit her each afternoon after school. They took walks around town, talking about their lives and their dreams. Penelope learned that Zachary had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, that he loved horses more than cattle, and that he dreamed of breeding quality horses that could help settlers survive the harsh frontier life. Zachary learned that Penelope had always wanted to be a teacher, that she loved books and learning, and that she believed education was the key to building a better world. She told him about her parents, about the loneliness of losing them, about how teaching gave her purpose. With each conversation, Penelope felt more comfortable with him. Zachary was kind and patient, never pushing her for an answer, content to just talk and let her get to know him. She found herself laughing at his stories about cattle drives, about ornery steers and unexpected adventures on the trail. On the third day, as they sat on a bench outside the general store watching the sun set over the hills, Zachary turned to her with a serious expression. "Miss Daniels, I want you to know that if you decide to take me up on my offer, I would never expect anything improper from you. Some men might use a situation like this to take advantage, but that is not who I am. My mother raised me better than that. This would be a business arrangement, pure and simple, until or unless you decided you wanted it to be something more." Penelope felt her cheeks warm at his words. Until or unless. Zachary looked out at the sunset, his profile strong and honest. "I will not lie to you, Miss Daniels. I find you to be a remarkable woman. You are kind and intelligent and brave. If circumstances were different, I would be courting you properly. But I know this situation is complicated, and I do not want you to feel pressured. So I am saying that we can keep this strictly professional, or we can see where it leads. That choice would be yours." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. No one had ever been so direct and honest with her before. "You barely know me, Mr. Foster." "I know enough," he said, turning to look at her. "I know you were praying in an empty schoolhouse because you care so much about your students that losing them broke your heart. I know you face an uncertain future with courage instead of bitterness. I know you listen when people talk and you think before you speak. That is more than I knew about most people I worked with for months on the cattle drives." That night, Penelope made her decision. She found Zachary at the boarding house the next morning before school. "Mr. Foster," she said when he came down to the parlor, "I accept your offer. I would like to be your partner in this venture." The smile that spread across Zachary's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You mean it?" "I do, but I have conditions. I want a contract, something written that protects both of us. I want my own house as you promised, and I want to maintain my reputation in town. I will teach the children, and you will build your ranch, and we will see what happens from there." "Agreed to all of it," Zachary said immediately. "I will go to the lawyer today and have him draw up a contract." They shook hands, and Penelope felt a surge of hope that she had not felt in months. Maybe her prayers had been answered after all. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Zachary purchased land just outside of Jamestown, a beautiful piece of property with a creek running through it and good grazing land for horses. He hired men to help him build 2 structures, a small cabin for Penelope and a larger barn that would also serve as his temporary living quarters until he could build a proper ranch house. Penelope finished out her time at the schoolhouse, finally telling the children that she was not leaving town after all, but would be starting a new school for children from the surrounding area. Their joy and relief touched her deeply. The school board was less pleased, seeing her continued presence as a criticism of their decision, but there was nothing they could do about it. If Mr. Foster wanted to pay her salary and provide the school building, that was his right. Martha Henderson and some of the other women in town helped Penelope move her few belongings to the new property. The cabin Zachary had built for her was simple but well made, with a wood stove, a bed, a table and chairs and shelves for her precious books. "He did good work," Martha said approvingly as they arranged Penelope's things. "You can tell a lot about a man by how he builds something for someone else." Penelope had to agree. Every detail of the cabin showed care and thought. The windows were positioned to catch the morning light. The door fit snugly to keep out drafts. There was even a small covered porch where she could sit in the evenings. Zachary kept his distance during those first weeks, focusing on building the barn and setting up the ranch. He purchased 6 horses to start, beautiful animals with good temperaments. Penelope would watch him work with them from her cabin window, seeing how gentle and patient he was. They took their meals together, cooking in turns, and talked about their plans. Zachary wanted to breed horses that were strong enough for ranch work, but gentle enough for families. Penelope wanted to create a school that did more than just teach reading and writing, but also practical skills that children would need to survive on the frontier. You could teach them about animals, Zachary suggested one evening as they sat on her porch watching the stars. How to care for them, how to recognize when they are sick. That would be valuable knowledge. Would you be willing to help with that? Penelope asked. The children would learn better from someone who truly knows horses. I would be honored, Zachary said, and the smile he gave her made her heart skip. As spring turned to summer in 1878, their partnership grew into friendship. Zachary would often join Penelope in the evenings, sitting on her porch or his, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh, and he discovered that she could be surprisingly witty when she relaxed. But there was also an undercurrent of something more, a tension that grew with each passing day. Penelope found herself thinking about Zachary at odd moments, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he worked, the kindness in his voice when he spoke to the horses. For his part, Zachary was clearly struggling with his own feelings. Sometimes Penelope would catch him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch, but he always looked away quickly, respecting the boundaries they had established. In early July, the school opened. 5 families from the surrounding homesteads sent their children, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Penelope converted part of the barn into a classroom, and Zachary helped her build desks and benches for the students. On the first day of school, Penelope stood before her new students with a sense of purpose and joy she had not felt since arriving in California. This was her school, her opportunity to make a real difference. Zachary kept his promise to help with the practical lessons. Once a week, he would teach the children about horses, showing them how to approach the animals safely, how to brush them, how to check their hooves for stones. The children adored him, and Penelope's heart swelled watching him interact with them. "You would make a good father," she said one day without thinking, then immediately regretted it when she saw Zachary's surprised expression, but he just smiled sadly. "I always thought I would have children someday, but life has not worked out that way so far." "You are still young," Penelope said. "You have time." "Maybe," Zachary said, looking at her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Maybe not. Some things you cannot plan." That night, Penelope lay in bed thinking about his words. She was 22 years old and Zachary was 28. They were building something good here, something meaningful. But was it enough? Or did she want more? The answer came to her in the darkness of her cabin. She wanted more. She wanted Zachary in a way that went beyond partnership and friendship. She wanted his smile to be the first thing she saw in the morning and the last thing at night. She wanted to build a life with him, not just a ranch and a school. But how could she tell him? What if he did not feel the same way? What if she ruined everything they had built together? A week later, a summer storm rolled through the area, bringing with it torrential rain and lightning that lit up the sky. Penelope was in her cabin when she heard a crash and saw flames leap up from the barn. Lightning had struck it. She ran out into the rain without thinking, screaming for Zachary. He was already running toward the barn, toward the horses trapped inside. Penelope followed him, terrified that he would be hurt. Together, they managed to get all 6 horses out safely, leading them away from the burning building. The rain helped slow the fire, but there was no saving the barn. They stood in the mud, soaked to the skin, watching it burn. "The school," Penelope said, her voice breaking. "All the desks, the books." Zachary put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We will rebuild. The horses are safe, you are safe." That is what matters." She turned into him, pressing her face against his chest, and felt his arms tighten around her. They stood like that for a long moment, rain pouring down on them, the burning barn crackling in front of them. "I was so scared," Penelope whispered. "When I saw you running toward the fire, I was terrified something would happen to you." "I am all right," Zachary murmured into her hair. "We are both all right." She pulled back to look up at him, water streaming down both their faces. "Zachary, I need to tell you something." His eyes searched hers in the flickering firelight. "What is it? This partnership, this friendship, it is not enough for me anymore. I want more. I want you." For a moment, Zachary just stared at her, and Penelope's heart sank, thinking she had made a terrible mistake. But then he was cupping her face in his hands, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Penelope," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have wanted to hear you say that for months. I have been half in love with you since that day I found you praying in the schoolhouse." "Only half?" she asked, trying to smile through her tears. "All the way in love," he corrected, and then he was kissing her. The kiss was everything Penelope had secretly dreamed of, gentle and passionate, tender and desperate all at once. She wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Penelope Daniels," he said. "I think I have loved you from the moment I saw you kneeling in that schoolhouse, whispering your prayers. You were the answer to prayers I did not even know I was making." "I love you too," Penelope said, feeling like her heart might burst with joy. "And you were my answered prayer. I asked for help, for a sign, and God sent me you." They kissed again, heedless of the rain and the burning barn and everything else. In that moment, nothing existed but the two of them and the love they had finally admitted. The next morning, despite the destruction of the barn, Penelope woke with a sense of joy and purpose. Zachary came to her cabin early, looking tired but happy. They sat together on her porch, drinking coffee and making plans. "I will rebuild the barn better than before," Zachary said. "And I will build a proper schoolhouse too, separate from where I keep the horses." "We should get married," Penelope said suddenly, then blushed at her own boldness. "I mean, if you want to. I know we have only been courting for one night, but we have known each other for months, and I do not see the point in waiting when I already know what I want." Zachary set down his coffee cup and took her hand. "I want that more than anything, but I want to do it right. I want to court you properly, even if it is only for a few weeks. I want the town to know that you are becoming my wife because we love each other, not because of some arrangement." Penelope felt her heart swell with love for this good, honorable man. "All right, but not too long. I am impatient to start our life together." "1 month," Zachary promised. 1 month of proper courting and then we get married. Does that sound reasonable?" "It sounds perfect." The news of their courtship spread through Jamestown quickly. Some people were shocked, while others claimed they had seen it coming all along. Martha Henderson was delighted and immediately began helping Penelope plan a simple wedding. "I knew that man was special the moment I met him," Martha said as they looked through fabric for a wedding dress. "And I knew you two would find each other. Sometimes God's plans are clearer to everyone else than they are to us." Zachary courted Penelope with a sweetness and dedication that made her fall even more deeply in love with him. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, helped her salvage what books they could from the burned barn, and took her on picnics by the creek. They talked for hours about their dreams for the future, about the family they wanted to have, about the life they would build together. The temporary school was set up in a tent that some of the families donated, and Penelope continued teaching while Zachary worked on rebuilding. The children were excited about the wedding, and Penelope found herself blushing when they asked her questions about being married. One evening, about 2 weeks into their courtship, Zachary took Penelope on a walk to a hilltop overlooking their property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling out a piece of paper from his pocket. "I have been drawing up plans for our house. Our real house, the one we will live in together." He unfolded the paper, showing her a detailed sketch of a 2-story home with a wraparound porch and large windows. "It is beautiful," Penelope said, touched that he had put so much thought into it. "This room here," Zachary pointed to one of the upstairs rooms, "I thought this could be a nursery. And these other rooms, they could be for more children as our family grows. And down here, I designed this room to be a study for you, where you could keep your books and prepare your lessons." Tears sprang to Penelope's eyes. "You thought of everything." "I want to give you the life you deserve," Zachary said softly. "I want to build you a home where you feel safe and loved and cherished every single day." "You already have," Penelope said, taking his hands. "Home is not a building, Zachary. Home is wherever you are." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Penelope knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. This man, this kind and generous cowboy who had walked into her life when she needed him most, was her future. The wedding took place on a warm August afternoon in 1878, exactly 1 month after their first kiss in the rain. The ceremony was held outdoors on their property, with the partially rebuilt barn as a backdrop and the rolling hills stretching out behind them. Penelope wore a simple cream-colored dress that Martha had helped her sew, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Zachary wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. His hands shook slightly as he held hers during the ceremony, but his voice was strong and clear when he spoke his vows. "I promise to love you and cherish you for all the days of my life," he said, his brown eyes locked on hers. "I promise to be your partner, your friend, your shelter in any storm. You are the answer to my prayers, Penelope, and I will spend every day proving myself worthy of that gift." Penelope had to blink back tears as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to love you with my whole heart, to stand by your side through whatever comes. You found me when I was lost, Zachary, and you gave me hope when I had none. I will be your wife, your helpmate, your companion for all our days." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Zachary kissed her, everyone cheered. It was a small gathering, perhaps 30 people from town and the surrounding homesteads, but it felt perfect to Penelope. These were the people who would be their community, their family. That night, Zachary carried Penelope over the threshold of what had been her cabin and was now their temporary home until the big house was built. He set her down gently, cupping her face in his hands. "Hello, wife," he said softly. "Hello, husband," she replied, and they both laughed at the strangeness and wonder of those words. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of nervous laughter and gentle touches. Zachary was patient and loving, making Penelope feel cherished and safe. As they lay together afterward, his arms wrapped around her, Penelope thought about how far she had come from that desperate woman praying in an empty schoolhouse. "What are you thinking?" Zachary murmured against her hair. "I am thinking about prayers," Penelope said. "About how sometimes God answers them in ways we never expected." "Best answer I ever got," Zachary said, kissing the top of her head. The next months were busy and full of joy. Zachary worked on building their house and expanding the horse operation, while Penelope taught school and helped with the ranch work when she could. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, working side by side during the day and falling into each other's arms at night. In October, Penelope realized she might be pregnant. She waited another few weeks to be sure before telling Zachary, wanting to give him the news when she was certain. When she finally told him one evening after supper, his reaction was everything she had hoped for. Truly. He asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "We are going to have a baby, we are," Penelope confirmed, laughing as he swept her up and spun her around. "Careful," she protested. "You will make me dizzy." He set her down gently, then knelt in front of her, pressing his hands against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Penelope ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man. "You are going to be such a good father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. The house was completed in December, and they moved in just before Christmas. It was everything Zachary had promised, spacious and well-built, with a study for Penelope and a nursery already prepared for their baby. On a cold February morning in 1879, Penelope went into labor. Martha Henderson and the doctor from town came to help, while Zachary paced anxiously downstairs. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Zachary could hear Penelope's cries of pain, and he felt helpless, able to do nothing but pray. Finally, just before dawn, he heard a new sound, the wail of a baby. He rushed upstairs to find Martha smiling at him from the doorway of their bedroom. "You have a son," she said. "A beautiful, healthy boy, and Penelope is doing well." Zachary entered the room to find his wife propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Meet our son," she said softly. Zachary approached slowly, awed by the sight of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and Penelope's delicate features. When Zachary reached out to touch one tiny hand, the baby's fingers curled around his thumb. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered. "You are perfect. How are you feeling?" "Tired," Penelope admitted, "but happy, so happy." They named him Thomas Zachary Foster, and he became the center of their world. Zachary was a devoted father, often walking the floor with Thomas at night so Penelope could sleep. She watched them together with a full heart, amazed at how gentle and patient Zachary was with their son. Penelope took a few months off from teaching to recover and bond with Thomas, but by late spring, she was eager to return to the classroom. They worked out a schedule where she taught in the mornings, and Zachary watched Thomas while working in the nearby barn. Some days, Penelope would teach with Thomas sleeping in a cradle nearby, much to the delight of her students. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. The ranch prospered as Zachary's reputation for breeding quality horses grew. People came from surrounding counties to buy his animals. The school continued to thrive, and Penelope even added evening classes for adults who wanted to learn to read. When Thomas was 18 months old, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise but no less joyful. "Another one," Zachary said, grinning as he placed his hand on her belly. "Our family is growing." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Zachary said. "Sometimes I think about that day I walked into the schoolhouse and found you praying, and I wonder what would have happened if I had just kept riding. I almost did, you know. I almost told myself it was not my business." "I am glad you did not," Penelope said, kissing him. "I am glad you were brave enough to stop and ask if someone needed help." "I needed help just as much as you did," Zachary admitted. "I was so lost, Penelope. I had no purpose, no direction. You gave me all of that." Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Margaret Foster, was born in January 1881. The birth was easier than Thomas's had been, and Sarah came into the world with a lusty cry that made everyone laugh. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. Life continued to bless them. Over the next several years, they added 3 more children to their family. Another daughter named Emily, then twin boys they named James and Henry. Their house was full of laughter and noise. Toys and books scattered everywhere, small muddy footprints trailing through the kitchen. The school expanded as more families settled in the area. Eventually, Jamestown built a new proper schoolhouse in town, but many families still preferred to send their children to Penelope's school on the Foster Ranch. She taught 3 days a week now, balancing her time between education and raising her growing family. Zachary built a bigger barn and expanded his horse operation. He also started taking on apprentices, young men who wanted to learn the trade. The Foster Ranch became known throughout California as a place where you could get both quality horses and quality training. On their 10th wedding anniversary in August 1888, Zachary and Penelope stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 9 now, a serious boy who loved books like his mother. Sarah, at 7, was already showing an aptitude for working with horses like her father. Emily was 5 and full of mischief, while the twins, just 3 years old, were into everything. "You ever think about that day in the schoolhouse?" Zachary asked, his arm around Penelope's waist. "All the time," Penelope admitted. "I think about how desperate I was, how lost I felt, and then you walked through that door." "I heard you praying," Zachary said. "I heard you asking for help, for a sign. Did you ever imagine this would be the answer?" Penelope looked out at their beautiful property, the house they had built together, the children they had created, the life they had made. "No," she said honestly. "I could not have imagined this. I was praying for basic survival, for a way to not be alone. God gave me so much more than I asked for." "He gave us both more," Zachary said, pulling her close. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that you are mine, that we have all of this." "Believe it," Penelope said, turning to kiss him. "This is real. This is our life, and I would not change a single thing." That evening, after the children were in bed, Zachary and Penelope sat together in the study she used for preparing lessons. He was mending a bridle while she graded papers, a comfortable silence between them. "I have been thinking," Zachary said after a while, "about expanding again. Maybe starting to breed cattle along with the horses. What do you think?" "I think you have a good head for business," Penelope said. "And I trust your judgment, but do not take on more than you can handle. I want you to have time for the children, for us." "Always," Zachary promised. "Nothing is more important than family. The business is just a means to provide for all of you." Penelope set down her pen and moved to sit on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You are a good man, Zachary Foster, the best man I know." "You make me better," he said, kissing her softly. "You and the children, you give me purpose. Before I met you, I was just drifting. Now I have roots, a reason to build something lasting." As the years continued to pass, those roots grew deeper. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who went away to university to study law, though he promised to return to Jamestown when he finished. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own family just a few miles down the road. Emily showed a talent for teaching and began helping Penelope with the school. The twins, James and Henry, were inseparable and shared their father's love of horses. They worked on the ranch with Zachary, learning every aspect of the business. By the time they were in their late teens, they were running much of the day-to-day operations themselves. In 1895, Penelope and Zachary became grandparents for the first time when Sarah gave birth to a daughter. Holding that tiny baby girl, Penelope was transported back to the birth of her own children, to the overwhelming love she had felt. Zachary was equally smitten with his granddaughter, and Penelope often caught him sneaking over to Sarah's house to visit. "You are spoiling her," Penelope teased him one evening. "That is what grandparents are supposed to do," Zachary replied with a grin. "Besides, I have years of experience. Remember how scared we were with Thomas? Now I actually know what I am doing." Life was not without its challenges. There were years when drought threatened the ranch, times when money was tight, illnesses that scared them. But through it all, Penelope and Zachary faced everything together, their love and partnership stronger than any obstacle. On a warm spring evening in 1898, 20 years after that fateful day in the schoolhouse, Penelope and Zachary took a walk together, something they still made time for despite their busy lives. They were both in their 40s now, with streaks of gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but to each other, they were as beautiful as the day they met. They walked to the same hilltop where Zachary had once shown her the plans for their house. The house stood below them now, lights glowing in the windows, smoke curling from the chimney. Beyond it, they could see the expanded barns and pastures, the small schoolhouse Zachary had built for Penelope, the fruit trees they had planted that were now mature and bearing. "We built this," Penelope said softly. "Together we built all of this." "You were the foundation," Zachary said. "That day I walked into the schoolhouse and found you praying. I was at the lowest point of my life. I had no direction, no hope. And then I saw you, and something in me knew that you were important, that I could not just walk away." "I was praying for help," Penelope remembered. "Asking God to show me what to do, where to go. I never imagined He would send me you." "I was your answered prayer, and you were mine," Zachary said, taking her hand. "We prayed for different things, but we got what we both needed, each other." They stood on that hilltop for a long time, watching the sun set over the land they loved, the home they had built, the life they had created together. Below them, they could see James and Henry working in the barn, Emily reading on the porch, the lights of Sarah's house in the distance where their grandchildren were probably being tucked into bed. "I love you, Penelope Foster," Zachary said, the same words he had spoken countless times over the past 20 years, but they never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Penelope replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to walk into that schoolhouse. Thank you for seeing me, for helping me, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Zachary said, and he kissed her as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. As they walked back down the hill together, hand in hand, Penelope thought about the journey that had brought them here. She had been a desperate woman with no future, kneeling alone in an empty schoolhouse, whispering prayers into the silence. And Zachary had been a lonely cowboy with no home, searching for something he could not name. Together, they had found what they were looking for. They had built a home, raised a family, created a legacy that would outlast them both. The schoolhouse was still operating, now run by Emily, teaching a new generation of children. The ranch was thriving, providing quality horses throughout California and beyond. Their children and grandchildren were carrying on their values of hard work, kindness, and faith. That night, lying in bed with Zachary's arms around her, Penelope offered up a prayer of gratitude. She thanked God for answering her desperate pleas 20 years ago, for sending her exactly what she needed even when she did not know what to ask for. She thanked Him for Zachary, for their children, for the life they had built together. And she thanked Him for teaching her that sometimes the darkest moments come right before the dawn, that sometimes when we feel most alone is when help is already on its way, that sometimes answered prayers arrive in the form of a lonely cowboy walking through a door. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost Martha Henderson to illness in 1901, mourning the loss of their dear friend who had supported them from the beginning. But they also celebrated Thomas's marriage and his return to Jamestown to open a law practice. The twins both married local girls and brought their wives to live on the ranch, building small houses on the property so the Foster legacy could continue. In 1905, when Penelope turned 50, their children threw them a surprise party. The house was filled with family and friends, children and grandchildren running everywhere, laughter and music filling the air. Standing in the middle of it all, Penelope felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the abundant life she had been given. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Zachary led Penelope out to the porch. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead. "What are you thinking?" Penelope asked, leaning against him. "I am thinking about that terrified woman I met in the schoolhouse all those years ago," Zachary said, "and how brave she was, how much faith she had even when everything seemed hopeless." "I did not feel brave," Penelope admitted. "I felt lost and scared." "But you kept praying," Zachary pointed out. "You kept hoping. That takes courage, and look at what came from that hope. Look at what we built." Penelope looked out at their land, at the homes of their sons nearby, thought about their daughter's family just down the road, their grandchildren sleeping peacefully. She thought about all the students she had taught over the years, some of whom were now teachers themselves. She thought about the horses Zachary had bred that were helping families survive and thrive throughout the West. "We were both answers to prayer," she said softly. "You saved me that day, but I saved you too." "You did," Zachary agreed. "We saved each other." They stood together under the stars, two people who had found each other at the lowest points of their lives and built something beautiful together. The lonely cowboy and the praying teacher, now husband and wife, partners and best friends, bound together by love and faith, and the belief that sometimes miracles come in unexpected forms. As they grew older, Penelope and Zachary gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch and school, letting their children take over. James and Henry proved to be excellent ranchers, expanding the business even further. Emily became known as one of the best teachers in the county, and Thomas's law practice flourished. But even in their retirement, Penelope and Zachary stayed active. Zachary still worked with the horses most days, unable to fully step away from what he loved. Penelope continued to tutor children who needed extra help, and she started writing down her teaching methods in a book that she hoped would help other frontier teachers. In 1910, they celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary surrounded by their 5 children, their 12 grandchildren, and the first of what would become many great-grandchildren. It was a beautiful summer day, much like their wedding day so many years before. During the celebration, Thomas stood up to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have shown us what true love looks like, what real partnership means. You built this family, this ranch, this legacy from nothing but faith and hard work. Everything good in our lives, we owe to you." "Hear, hear," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Penelope wiped tears from her eyes as she looked around at all the faces, all the lives that had come from that one moment 23 years ago when Zachary had walked through the schoolhouse door. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Zachary pulled out a folded piece of paper from his desk drawer. "I wrote something," he said, looking almost shy. "I am not good with words like you are, but I wanted to try to capture what these years have meant to me." He unfolded the paper and read, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I was a lonely cowboy with no place to call home, wandering from town to town with no purpose beyond surviving another day. Then I heard prayers in an empty schoolhouse, and I found the courage to walk through that door. Behind it was a woman who would become my everything, who would give my life meaning and direction. Together we built a home, raised a family, created something that will outlast us both. If I could go back to that younger version of myself, lost and alone, I would tell him to hold on. I would tell him that answered prayers are coming, in the form of a beautiful teacher with faith strong enough to move mountains. I would tell him that the best years of his life are waiting, that love and joy and purpose are just around the corner. But I think he would not believe me, because what we built together is beyond anything I could have imagined. Penelope, you were my answered prayer. You are still my answered prayer, every single day. By the time he finished reading, both of them were crying. Penelope took the paper from his hands and carefully folded it, placing it in the box where she kept her most precious mementos. Their wedding rings from the ceremony, pressed flowers from their wedding day, the first drawings their children had made. "Keep it safe," Zachary said. "For our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, so they know where we came from." "They will know," Penelope promised. "We will make sure they know that faith and love can overcome any obstacle, that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures." They lived many more good years together, watching their family continue to grow and prosper. Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1918 at the age of 68, with Penelope at his side holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for saying yes, back in the schoolhouse. Thank you for giving me a life worth living." Penelope grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 6 years, continuing to teach and write and spend time with her family. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch of the house Zachary had built for her and remember that desperate day in the schoolhouse, when she had knelt alone and prayed for help. God had answered with a lonely cowboy who became her husband, her partner, her great love. Together they had created something beautiful and lasting from faith and hope and love. When Penelope passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1924 at the age of 68, her children found among her things a letter she had written to be read after her death. In it, she recounted the story of meeting Zachary, of praying in that empty schoolhouse and having her prayers answered in the most unexpected way. She ended the letter with these words, "To my children, grandchildren, and all who come after, never lose faith, even in your darkest moments. Keep praying, keep hoping, keep believing that better days are ahead. Your father and I found each other when we both needed saving, and from that chance meeting came all of you, this family, this legacy. You are the answer to prayers we did not even know to make. Live with love, work with purpose, and never forget that miracles can arrive in unexpected forms, sometimes through the simple act of a stranger walking through a door. We loved you all beyond measure, and we will be watching over you always. Remember us not with sadness, but with joy, knowing that we had a beautiful life together and that our love continues in each of you." The Foster Ranch and School continued to operate for generations, a testament to the love story that began with prayers in an empty schoolhouse, and a lonely cowboy brave enough to stop and ask if someone needed help. Their descendants never forgot the story of Penelope and Zachary, passing it down through the years as a reminder that faith and love can overcome any obstacle, that sometimes the most desperate moments lead to the most beautiful futures, and that answered prayers sometimes arrive wearing dusty boots and a cowboy hat, ready to build a lifetime of love together.